So everybody keeps talking about something is going to happen today at noon. There must be a big Torah study session going on. I know it's affected attendance and it's on people's minds, so it must be a big Torah study session. All I'll say is that, for some teams, the Lord is the 12th person on the field. That's all I'll say. I happen to have a few extra hours this week. Doesn't happen often, but it was Thanksgiving week, so I had a few extra hours, so I picked up Caleb's cell phone. Yes, Caleb has a cell phone. Okay, we gave in. Rebecca and I needed new ones. We got new ones. Caleb got the old ones. You know how the story goes. Yes, he's got his own cell phone. He's at that age. So I picked it up and I started helping him set the clock. There's a clock app on your cell phone. Right? So of course I looked at it automatically. It's set to New York City, New York, United States of America. Okay, so I change it. Set it for Detroit, Michigan, United States of America. And as you scroll through, you can see that there are all these different cities that you can choose from around the world. And it lists the city, the state, or the region, depending on the country, and then it lists the country. Me being me, first I set Caleb's clock for Detroit, Michigan, United States of America. But you can set secondary clocks that you can kind of switch to and check the times and things like that. So of course, what do I set immediately after Detroit? No, not Ann Arbor, though that would have been a good guess. Jerusalem. Now, you go from New York City, New York, United States of America, to Detroit, Michigan, United States of America, to Jerusalem, Jerusalem. The all-knowing iPhone only lists Jerusalem. So I had that on my mind this week as we come to Parshat Vayishlach. And we read the story of Jacob becoming Yisrael. Jacob becoming Israel. Jacob becoming the person, the man who struggles with God. We are Bnei Yisrael. We are the descendants of Jacob. The land of Israel is so called because it was a land that was promised to Abraham and his descendants, through Isaac and his descendants, and through Jacob, through Israel and his descendants. And just a moment ago, Ben spoke so beautifully about his experience in Israel, and we know how important the teen mission and other similar teen trips are to the future of the Jewish people. Because primarily the goal of those teen trips is to teach Ahavat Yisrael, is to teach a love of Israel, a relationship to Israel, a connection to the land and to the idea. Even in a 5-week trip like the teen mission, you can't teach the entire history of the Israeli-Arab conflict. Though we know beginning in late high school perhaps, but certainly once they get to college, our students are going to be encountered by haters. People who hate the Jews, people who don't understand Israel, and people who are in some ways self-loathing, and so they seek to destroy the land of Israel. But I think they also come into contact with people who have a very different ideal of what the end of days is going to be, a different vision for what that messianic ideal is going to look like. So I wanted to take a moment this morning, a very brief moment this morning, to take a look at our Torah portion and the picture it begins to paint for the messianic ideal. You see, if we go back a couple of Torah portions ago, and we read Parshat Toldot, we see the birth of Jacob and Esau. And you remember the Torah tells us that 2 nations were there in Rebekah's womb. They were twins. But already she received the prophecy when she was pregnant that there are 2 nations in her womb. And then it says in the Torah portion, those 2 nations, V'yafridu, will become separate. We see that play out over the last couple weeks with the story of Jacob sort of cajoling Esau into giving him the birthright, and then later on Jacob tricking his father Isaac into giving Jacob rather than Esau the blessing of the firstborn. And so now, At the end of last week's Torah portion, you remember Jacob had to flee the land of Israel and head to the land of Haran, which is where Rebekah is from, so that ultimately Jacob gets married, he acquires 4 wives, he acquires 13 kids, and he has lots of wealth that he's acquired along the way. Now Jacob is ready to come back to Eretz Yisrael, an anachronism until this week's Torah portion. Jacob is ready to come back to the land that was promised to his ancestors, so he does. But in order to do that, he has to encounter his older brother Esau. In that moment, as Jacob is preparing to encounter his brother, he spends the night next to a river and spends that night wrestling with an angel. Just before dawn breaks, the angel lets Jacob go, renames Jacob Israel, the one who struggles with God. And Jacob goes on to encounter Esau. And rather than the war that Jacob was expecting, instead Esau welcomes his brother with a hug. Though the rabbis aren't really sure that that was a sincere hug. And they come to paint this picture that as Esau was hugging his younger brother Jacob, he actually lunged for his neck to try to bite him and kill him. That's how the rabbis read it. But ultimately it seems that the brothers somehow reconcile, and they each go their separate ways. Herein is the beginning of the Jewish vision of the Messianic ideal. Because in our Torah portion, when Jacob and Esau separate, it's not that they've come together, they've hugged, they've all made up again, now they live next door to each other and live happily ever after. But rather it says that Esau goes on to the land of Seir, which will later be called Edom. It is the land on the other side of the Dead Sea, on the east side of the Dead Sea, in what is now southern Jordan, or sort of the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia. Jacob goes on to settle in the land of Israel, and he makes that his home. The end of the story of Jacob and Esau, this idea of reconciliation, is more of an idea that good fences make good neighbors. They each go their separate way. They each create their own space, their own land. The Jewish messianic vision for the end of days is just that. That the Jews will have the land of Israel, and that every people will have their own land, wherever it might be. They'll certainly live in peace and harmony. One nation will not cause another nation to fear. One nation will not lift up sword against another nation, but that they'll each have their own place, the Jews having the land of Israel. How contrary that is to our modern-day sort of Western American ideal of a messianic vision. The modern-day American messianic vision, I think, is really more of a mixing bowl. Right? This American idea that we all come together, we lose our previous identity, and we take on this one new identity that everybody shares equally. But the Jewish messianic ideal is really more of a salad bowl. We're all in this together for sure, but each vegetable stands on its own. I'll let you decide whether we're the cucumber or the tomato or the lettuce. But the Jewish idea is the idea of a salad bowl, that each stands on its own together, though we're all in this together. As we celebrate the success of the teen mission, as we look to the importance of all of these different teen trips to Israel, we are further obligated to educate our children more than just for Ahavat Zion, more than just a love of Israel, but about a history of Israel. Really give them the facts on the ground so that when challenged, they can understand what's going on and they can properly defend the state of Israel. But we also have to remember in our conversations with these young people that we might be talking about two different ideals, two different visions, two different messianic hopes. And in seeking to educate our kids and educate ourselves, we have to remember those two different visions and perhaps seek a reconciliation between those two different ideals. On this Shabbat of Parashat Vayishlach, I challenge you. What in your heart is the ideal? What is the ideal vision that we should pursue? And how might we go about pursuing This week in which we read Parshat Vayishlach, in which we become, as it were, Israel, ones who struggle with God. May we work toward a day, wherever it is, whatever it looks like, when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall anyone study war anymore. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, and let us say together.